Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 10, actually Episode 16. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, our very special guest recorded live in person in Las Vegas Shop Talk is Neil Tenzer, Vice President, Customer Loyalty Insights and Engagement at Tractor Supply Company, TSC. Neil and his team drive customer value and brand engagement with powerful tools, such as the Neighbors Club, one of the largest and fastest growing loyalty programs with 39 million members. TSC, $12 billion in sales. Steve, this was such a treat for me, and I know it was as well for you. We're both fans of TSC. Neil's not our first executive on the pod. And the chance to talk loyalty tradecraft with such a proficient practitioner was a real treat.
Yeah, well, first of all, Neil's just a super smart guy. I've spent a little bit of time in Nashville, and I think the last time I was there a couple of years ago, maybe was the first time I met Neil when he was still working in strategy, and now he's moved on to this new role, and they are doing a ton of really interesting things. And I just love when we have guests who are able to just articulate what they're doing, why they're doing it, and bring some color as well as lessons really for our audience. So I think folks will really enjoy it.
Now, a reminder, we are the official podcast of the Commerce Next Growth Show in New York City in June. We'll be hosting their Nexties Awards ceremony. Looking forward to that. We'll also be doing a live onstage episode of the pod. But wait, that's not all. Breaking news.
Yes, breaking news. The closing keynote session will be a former guest of the podcast a while back now, Joe Kudla, Viori's CEO. CEO and founder. And turns out I'm going to be on stage with him. So Joe and I will wrap up the show. So hopefully people are already signed up for that. But if you're not, check out the show notes. We've got a discount code. So we look forward to seeing you in New York at the end of June.
All right, let's jump into news of the week. We have a new segment. People loved our wobbly unicorn segment so much. Now we're looking for a brand. It may be Tariff Corner, but we think we got the music nailed down when we're talking about tariffs. Maybe we'll call it Tariff Talk. What do you think? Maybe Tariff Talk.
I'm not sure, but as we have said, seems like every week we've got to spend a little bit of time, and sometimes more than a little bit of time, on what's going on tariffs. So this is no exception, and I suspect for a little while anyway, we'll be returning to Tariff Corner for some tariff talk.
Well, this week's theme, I guess, is the art of the fold. Subheading, how's that Russia negotiation going so far? But we do have actually a little bit of optimism in the past week to report on. So take us through it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bit of premature celebration here, but at least the stock market and the bond market bounced back a little bit, primarily because Trump both softened his stance on firing Jay Powell, chairman of the Fed. In fact, he said he's not going to. Seems like the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is going into Trump's office about every 5 minutes saying, what the hell are you doing? You got to help me out here. And at least for a little while anyway.
Then he goes and argues with Elon Musk and yells.
Yeah, then they have a shouting match. Yeah, it's really, it's just
what a show.
Awesome.
What a show.
Yeah, what a show. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. How about that for a deep cut reference? Anyway, but also... But this is kind of funny to me, if it weren't so sad, actually. Trump's doing a great job of negotiating with himself. I took a negotiating course, actually a couple, many, many years ago. And I remember one of the big takeaways was don't negotiate with yourself. And Trump, allegedly, Mr. Art of the Deal, keeps putting out different salvos to China, and China just seems to be kind of waiting him out. But in any event, there were a few comments, mostly from Treasury Secretary Bessent, that there may be that these tariffs were clearly unsustainable, and there may be some wiggle room there. So we'll see how that plays out. I think, one of the things that, at the risk of stating the obvious here, is aside from the general incompetence of the administration here, there's a huge problem with trying to do everything everywhere all at once. Like they, rather than phasing in these tariffs, they've basically set off a bomb with everybody on the planet. And so we've got this pause, but what it's going to take to really get some decent percentage of deals negotiated. We'll see. But there has been a parade of world leaders through the Oval Office the next few weeks. Some rumors that perhaps we're close to getting something with South Korea. But, we will see. There's a lot of work to be done. Maybe there'll be some
deals cut in the pews during the Pope's funeral while Trump reflects on the homily, perhaps. There's some deals to be done.
Or they could crash the conclave. I don't know. We'll see.
We see the white smoke whenever a deal is done. Maybe we do that.
I love it.
He picks up that theme from the White House.
I love it. Well, they may need some divine intervention to get this thing done, so we'll see.
Well, even if you were a competent administration, it's a big task, right? You're taking the whole world on all at once. Like you and I would know from our background, like don't try to boil the ocean. Like figure out what the priorities are, which should be, probably China, right? Anyway. Now, we had some retail CEOs. Speaking of parades of people, we had some retail CEOs making their way to the White House. Talk about what you heard and what your thoughts are.
Well, we didn't get a ton of readout from this. Interestingly, none of the CEOs that went in. So the CEOs that went in were the CEOs of Walmart, Target, and Home Depot. Apparently, from what was reported, Trump was struck by these CEOs saying, it's not going to be very long before Americans start to see empty shelves. And apparently that didn't occur to Trump, just like the price increases apparently didn't occur to him. So, the empty shelf thing, I've heard really mixed things on this. I had a couple of conversations last week with some folks that have a lot of contacts in the industry and have been speaking with some senior leaders. And I'd be interested to hear what you're hearing, though I realize, Canada's a different situation at the moment than the U.S. But a lot of what I heard was, maybe a bit on fresh products that are subject, at this point to 10%. But when it comes to things with long shelf life, it's probably going to be a while because so many retailers bought ahead. So anything that's spring, early summer is either on the shelf or will soon be on the shelf because it's in a distribution center. But I've also heard other people who seem to know something about this say, no, actually, we're going to start to see increasingly empty shelves really starting in the next couple of weeks. So I don't really know. I mean, we'll see what inventory levels look like when some of the big retailers start to report in a few weeks. I suspect we'll see inventories up quite a bit more than sales for this reason. But anyway, it's a little unclear. But I think the thing that everybody seems to be pretty much aligned on is with so few shipments coming in from China, when is that situation going to get resolved? Is enough product being produced? Really more at this point, we're talking about back to school, early fall. Eventually, we'll be talking about, holiday. So, the thing I heard one person talk about is kind of the pig and the python here, which is if we've had, at this point, I guess about 3 weeks where nothing's coming over, as time goes on, you can't necessarily accelerate enough shipments to close that gap because it takes 20 to 40 days for a ship to get across from China. Then you've got whatever time to manufacture, get it to the port, get it loaded and all that kind of stuff. So definitely a sense that back to school is becoming increasingly at risk. And then, as time goes on, it'll start to be fall. It'll start to be winter goods, holiday and all that kind of stuff. I guess the last thing I was going to say about the CEO meeting, though, is, as I said, there really wasn't a readout from this. And most CEOs have been very, very quiet. We get some things reported, people leaking what things are thinking. But you got to think that many retail CEOs are just aghast at what's happening. The criticality of the tariff situation being addressed just gets higher and higher literally every day. So we'll see.
Apoplectic.
Yeah, that's a great word.
You asked me what I'm hearing is I heard three things. One is, in Canada, it's a slightly different situation, but we're afraid of our retailers are afraid of getting caught up in the fray, the shipping fray, the supply chain challenges that are being created as you and I record this episode. The capacity issues at the ports, those things, back to the COVID era of capacity issues. Yeah. Two, they're more concerned, again, in the same genre when I talk to U.S. retailers about holiday. There's a lot of toys and, holiday decorations made in China, and those things are low margin. They like to float them nice and slow over on the water. Yeah. They're being made now, and they're just sitting in a warehouse, and they're going to start running out of room. They're
yeah, that's another issue. Sure, another issue, yeah.
On the positive side, if there's a positive side, the Canadian dollar is appreciating. There's a bit of like a little ray of sunshine from our side of the border, anyway.
Yeah. So another conversation I had was, or a couple conversations I had was around what's going on with pricing. And I know we've talked about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. The word that I'm hearing the most is surgical pricing increases, at least in the short term. We talked about, I think last week, Hermes taking some prices up this week. Louis Vuitton is taking prices up on many of their handbags. So it's kind of a question of where is their brand pricing power? Where is there perhaps less resistance on the consumer side? But then I think the expectation is we may start to see kind of phased increases, because part of, one of the things I think people get wrong is just this idea of cost plus, or your pricing is going to be dependent on whether there's a retail or cost accounting or any of these kinds of things. The consumer and the competition mainly sets prices with certainly a view as to what your landed cost is. But I think as consumer confidence is slowing and just this general malaise, retailers are likely to be cautious about taking prices up. So what I've heard is, maybe increase prices a little bit to see what happens with the elasticity of demand.
Let's talk about home sales. That's consumer confidence and home sales seem to be equally interesting these days. We've noted before that consumer confidence doesn't always correlate all that well to retail sales, but I've got to think home sales are a fairly direct leading indicator.
Yeah, there's a few things I think are leading indicators. One, just to remind people, so I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience understand, most retailers end their quarter at the end of April. So we will start to, I think, hear a lot more about what is going on and how retailers are seeing the future in just a few weeks. Walmart kicks things off on May 15th, and then we've got a couple, 2-3 weeks of retailers coming in. Amazon reports this week. They're on a slightly different schedule. So a lot of things we're looking at. So in terms of leading indicators, again, we see consumer confidence continue to tick down. March home sales in the United States were the slowest since 2009. So that's not a great sign. The other thing we can, I guess, look at in terms of leading indicators is a lot of other non-retail companies do end their quarters at the end of March. So we're getting some of those earnings right now. Chipotle had their first decline in same-store sales since 2020. Pepsi, P&G, a bunch of other CPG-type companies have either lowered their guidance or pulled their guidance. In fact, one of the retailers that does have a March-ending quarter is Skechers, and they've withdrawn their guidance. They basically don't know what's going to happen with the macroeconomics, but also airlines. And so we're just seeing a lot of folks that are either lowering guidance or pulling guidance. Another interesting thing, just kind of getting back to what we talked about last week about the pull forward of demand, our friends at Placer released some data that showed a spike in retail store traffic in March, also suggesting that people are getting out ahead, which would seem to suggest even more of a slowdown in the months ahead. But I'm going to draw on my inner Taylor Swift here, because what most people are pointing to is the bulk of these effects will really start to be seen probably July. And so that may lead to a cruel summer for retail.
There you go. And I'd pile on to that cruel summer with something we talked about last week, is that it's probably not going to be a great tourist season, which will impact small and indie retailers probably more than Home Depot, for example. But there you go. Let's go to other news. Luxury. We've been fans. We've covered luxury over our 10 seasons many times. We have many great guests, and it's such a fascinating lens on culture and retail. But what's going on with luxury? There's some interesting developments happening.
Well, there continues to be a lot of news. It was an article I was reading just this morning about this idea, is luxury falling out of fashion? And it's really kind of the confluence or convergence of a bunch of factors. Obviously, tariffs are a piece of this. A lot of luxury being purely discretionary. It's easy for people to pull back. We talked about that with LVMH's earnings last week. Maybe there's some broader cultural things about conspicuous consumption. So it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's driving all of this. But in terms of tangible news, Kering, the second biggest luxury conglomerate, so folks would know Kering primarily for Gucci. The Gucci business continues to be a big struggle. That brand was down 25% globally, which is a pretty horrible number. A lot of that driven by weakness in China, but also pretty weak across North America and Europe. So they got a lot of work to do there. I mean, that's much worse performance than pretty much everybody else in luxury. Going back to, we've probably talked about Saks Global a little bit too much on the podcast, but there's a lot going there, a lot going on there. A lot of nervousness around their cash flow continues. I would say, if anything, it's really been elevated. Both some of the things that have been reported in the press, but also a couple of conversations that I've had. Just a few quick facts there. Their bonds, which were used, the $2.2 billion that they financed to buy Neiman Marcus, those bonds were issued at 11%, which is a pretty high rate, but they're now trading at such a discount that the yield on them is 20%. Wow. So for a bondholder to expect, not to get into finance here too much, but for a bondholder to expect 20%, basically means that they don't see the equity as being worth very much, if anything.
Hilden, they might as well have used like an Amex credit card or a platinum card.
Yeah, you put it on your Capital One card, at least you get lounge access and some points. Hilden, which is one of the companies that does factoring of receivables, they've now tacked on an additional 3.5% surcharge to any Saks Global orders on top of their normal fees. So that's not awesome. Some of this, I'm going to say now, is not totally unexpected, but more layoffs at mainly in corporate functions as Saks combines functions, which is pretty ironic because some folks may remember that Saks Fifth Avenue split out .com and the physical store business. Well, now they're bringing it all back together again, plus Neiman Marcus. So anyway, some redundancies, I guess. They're closing a big fulfillment center in Tennessee, 450 jobs gone. The San Francisco flagship of Saks Fifth Avenue, which was scaled down to an appointment-only store last year, is now closing completely. There's a Neiman store practically next door, so I think that's an example of where consolidation makes sense. The Palm Beach store of Saks Fifth Avenue is also closing. I believe they announced that quite a bit earlier. But, I think the next thing really is, what are they going to do with some of the real estate? I know that there must be some groups that are looking at it, because I've gotten a few calls to consult on that. So I don't have anything that I can share about it. But aside from underperforming stores, there are 8 Saks and Neiman stores that are in exactly the same mall as we saw in Las Vegas, for those of you that checked out our YouTube channel. And then there are another 4 that are in nearby locations. As the business decelerates and they're looking for cost, that's a place to go. But whether they can negotiate their way out of enough stores to really make a difference, given their lease arrangements, or whether they have to file for bankruptcy to make it happen. So anyway, watch this space.
Let's stick in broadly speaking, the department store category. A few developments up here with Hudson's Bay. They finally gave up the ghost on the last 6 stores. They're going into liquidation as well. Hudson's Bay, very on brand, put out lately anyway, not when I was there, but put out an email that, thanks for 335 years. Read the room, my friend. Anyway, and then we've got if some might have known Frank and Oak. I mean, they did some North American expansion. They're going into liquidation as well. I thought they're already gone, by the way, so no surprise there.
That's usually that's like when I get from my kids. Didn't Sears close 10 years ago? Still hanging on.
Let's talk about Kohl's. So Kohl's, there's a bunch of news actually. Let's start with Kohl's.
Well, just quickly on Kohl's, this is actually a couple-week-old story at this point, but one of the big firms, retail analyst firms, TD Cowen, put Kohl's on liquidity watch. As we've talked about a bunch of times, Kohl's business has been very weak. They have a new CEO. They're trying to do a turnaround. But I think on top of all this, of course, is the slowdown in the economy that's expected to be coming here. Obviously, the tariff impact will affect Kohl's because they source quite a bit of product from China, I would think. And the trends are bad. But the main thing is they have some debt that is coming due in July. So that's just around the corner. and they will need to refinance that. And given the current market situation, the expectation is they're going to have a tough time refinancing that, or they'll have to refinance it at such a high rate, which will further aggravate their cash flow issues. So not a good situation there. Not as big a news from Catalyst Brands, the company that was recently formed. That main holding is J.C. Penney. They've announced, I think it's like their third round of headcount reductions in the last 6 months. Some of our listeners may recall last year I laughed. I don't know if I LOL'd when they made a statement that because they were opening one new store, which actually wasn't a new store, it was a relocation, that they may be opening new stores in the future. And there's a lot of excitement. Penny's is going to be back into growth mode. And I said I would be surprised if they opened any stores. But anyway, they did not announce they're opening any new stores. They announced they're closing 7 stores. Yeah. So not great news, not a big number, obviously, in the scheme of the number of stores they had. So we will see what happens. We'll get many of these companies' earnings in 3 or 4 weeks.
A small footnote in the one of our favorite retailers, My Teresa. They completed their acquisition, right?
Yeah, we talked about this. My Teresa has announced they're acquiring the not too elegantly named YNAP, the combination of Yux and Net-a-Porter, or Net-a-Porter, as some people say. So it is a luxury e-commerce powerhouse. Might be really good timing for them. First of all, the deal probably wouldn't have gotten done if it was been in play now, just given market conditions. Mm-hmm. But I think consolidating in this challenging luxury environment, as we just talked about, probably puts them in a good position. But I imagine that they're going to be experiencing many of the same headwinds that some of the other companies we talked about would be. But good news for them. I think they've really done an excellent job of being profitable and really growing very smartly. So we'll see what's next for them.
Lastly, as a best-selling author of not 1 but 2 books, the last piece of retail news must have you popping champagne corks or at least ordering reprints. Barnes & Noble plans to open more than 60 new locations in 2025. What do you make of that?
Well, amidst a lot of bad news, we try to end these things with a little bit of a feel-good story. But yeah, Barnes & Noble has been getting a lot of press in the last, 12 or 18 months because they have been opening stores, reformatting stores, and it may look like book selling is back, at least to a certain degree, because they plan to open 60 new locations in 2025. So that's a pretty good increase to their total. I forget exactly how many. It's several hundred stores now, but they've been kind of shrinking down, making some changes in terms of giving local buying power to their management team and redesigning to be a little bit more experiential and a little bit more current. So yeah, they seem to be getting good results and have the confidence to expand. So still appears to me that physical retail might not be dead.
Might not be dead. All right, well, that's it for the news. Let's leave it there, and let's now get to our most excellent interview with Neil Tenzer from TSC, Tractor Supply Company.
Neil, it's great to see you again, and particularly in this situation where you're coming on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you?
I am wonderful, Steve. It's an absolute privilege to be here. It's been a couple years since we last chatted at Shop Talk, but such a privilege to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you here, and we're catching you at the very end of Shop Talk, and we might come back and get into that a little bit more, but how's Shop Talk been for you?
It's been wonderful. I mean, just the opportunity to catch up with other people in the industry, really network, really be able to peek around the corners at some of the technology that you see and learn from other leaders in the industry. It's always a fantastic experience, and I look forward to it every single year.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. So let's get into the man behind the mic. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your professional journey that gets you to this very big conference room with lots of echo?
So my name is Neil Tenzer. I am the Vice President of Loyalty, Engagement, and Insights at Tractor Supply. If you think about my story, it's broadly in 3 chapters. I think back to when I was growing up, I really was all about math and science, but had this opportunity to work at Nordstrom in high school and in college. And that's, I think, where I got the the retail bug. And then going off to school, you think about how do you make a career out of that? What does that all look like, especially as somebody going into college? And I discovered economics. And to me, as somebody who is highly structured, kind of that recovering awkward person, right? Like learning how to relate to people. Economics was that kind of structured way to understand how people react, how they make decisions, and really understand how people make the decisions, especially in terms of retail, in terms of how they buy. So went to school there at Indiana, and then came out, and the next chapter of my career was really around management consulting. So typical economics, focused on strategy, a lot of different projects from clients around the world, lots of different verticals. But I always had this pull towards consumer and retail because I really loved understanding how consumers made the decisions that they do. Why did they have affinities for certain types of brands?
Sure.
And then I think the real inflection point came. I had an opportunity to come join Abercrombie & Fitch right as they were starting to think through what did the next chapter look like. And so I led strategy. I think that's a typical kind of post-consulting move. You go out and into the strategy realm. And I think that what's typical is you get tossed a whole lots of different types of square pegs that don't fit into round holes around the organization. So I worked at Abercrombie & Fitch on the turnaround strategy, customer insights, helped shape a few businesses, had the opportunity to join EssilorLuxottica and lead North America strategy during that integration down in Texas, Steve. So former neighbors.
Yes.
That's the eyeglass company, right?
That's exactly right. So if you're familiar with Ray-Ban, Oakley, LensCrafters, wonderful organization. And then Tractor Supply called back in 2021. You know, if you think back to that time, the leadership team was taking shape. Hal had this tremendous vision for what that would look like. And it was sort of one of those pinch me moments, right? You know, thinking through what does it look like to be a 15, 20, $25 billion company. So I had the opportunity to lead strategy there for 2 years before I took on this responsibility in customer engagement and loyalty and insights. And so now I'm responsible for what I affectionately call the LEAP team. It's an acronym, LEAP, loyalty, engagement, analytics, and personalization. But the metaphor is, 5 years ago, we were a catalog circular marketing organization. So thinking through, what does that look like from a personalized experience for a Tractor Supply customer?
Well, excellent. Well, before we go any further, though, we should probably just help people understand a bit more about Tractor Supply. Many of our listeners would, of course, know the brand very, very well, but because of our diverse audience, maybe not so much. So what should, say, somebody in Europe or Australia or India or Slovenia know about Tractor Supply if they don't?
One, that it's a wonderful company. We are the world's largest farm and ranch retailer. We have about 2,500 stores. 2,300 of those are Tractor Supplies. Another 200 are PetSense by Tractor Supply, which is a pet specialty retailer. And we recently acquired AlleyVet, which is a pet RX company. We are the dependable supplier for life out here. And what that means is that we are a needs-based, demand-driven lifestyle company. So our customers are those with, typically 2, 5, 10 acres of property. They have animals, growing families. 1 in 5 now have chickens. And so I know you get the laugh, but it's true. It's becoming a huge phenomenon in the United States and really around the world. I hear you mentioned Australia. Here they call them chooks there. So
okay. I'm going to take your word on that.
Yeah. So and so we are had tremendous growth over the last several years, and that's because of this affinity for living life out here.
So I spent a bunch of years at Black & Decker, so I love the channel that you're in. You have a lot of competitors. You can see that in Canada, your counterpart, so to speak, that used to own the brand, PV Mart, just went into liquidation. So it's not like your growth has come without, an incredible competitive set. Talk about what has been the driver behind this great growth. You've mentioned a couple things, great leadership and insights, and of course bringing you on has a big factor to that, of course.
You're flattering me, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
But what are those kind of key factors around in a fairly crowded market, figuring that lane and experience that growth?
I think it's really a focus on the customer, and we have a very specific customer. So while people compete in the space in which we are at, we are really a one-stop shop lifestyle retailer. So for the communities that we serve, we are the one place where they can get all of those needs met, whether that's for their companion animals, which is dog or cat needs, feed, whether that's ag equipment, apparel, tools. So while a lot of different retailers play in those different spaces, we have really found ourselves as that unique destination, that one-stop shop that customers come and visit on an ongoing, regular basis. And sometimes that's that varies from every 6 to 8 weeks to sometimes even once or twice a week.
Wow. Yeah, because there's a lot of places to get a power tool, but that's, so you're going to kind of, that's table stakes, but where you differentiate is in the feed and the locations and all those kind of things that really make it happen for your customers, right?
Absolutely. Like when you think about Tractor Supply, and just for your international audience as well, I mean, we sell over 8 billion pounds of feed and food a year.
Wow.
When you have a dog, you're coming in every 6 weeks or so to feed that animal. If you have horses, chickens, things like that, you're coming in even more frequently. So that regularity of that customer is super important for our customer, but also for our communities to kind of be that central point for them to come to.
Just a quick question. My impression, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you've had a tremendous amount of store growth over the last number of years, and my impression is a fair percentage of those are starting to be more in maybe outlying suburban areas, not necessarily quite as much the ranch and the smaller markets, ranch and farm. Is that true? And if so, has that shifted anything in your strategy?
So the answer is yes. The way I always talk about out here, one, it's really a lifestyle. So a lot of people embrace it even inside the Beltway. But I always like to think about it as if you look at a city, it's outside the Beltway. I think if you were to drive 45 minutes outside of New York, you'd finally reach one. But I think we have 2 in Odessa, Texas, right? So
right.
If you were to think about our store locations, are really informed by where our customers are and where that growth has come from. And so absolutely you see in kind of those Beltway cities, you see a lot of our stores in those locations, what we call like suburbs and then even exurbs. But we still continue to see growth in more rural areas as well, because the demand for animal feed and co-an, which is we had tremendous growth in, as well as chickens, even in suburban neighborhoods, continues to grow.
Yeah, interesting. So let's maybe... Yeah, you mentioned your acronym, the LEAP acronym. Maybe talk about the L and the E in particular for a little bit. So you've got this Neighbors Club loyalty program.
We're at a little over 38 million.
Representing about 80% of revenue?
Absolutely.
And something like 75% retention?
Absolutely. And actually, if you go to our top tier customers, it's over 90%.
So pretty impressive stats. Talk a little bit more about what makes the program successful, but I guess more in particular, what are you doing to really drive that customer behavior that you're trying to drive, whatever that might be, whether that's repeat purchase, retention, whatever that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts with an understanding of the customer. So we shared this a little bit earlier. We have broadly 5 types of customers. So you were kind of asking at it before. We have kind of our country dabbler. This is that suburban customer, Steve, that you were talking about, who has an affinity for the brand and the lifestyle, and maybe comes in a bit more seasonally. But then they graduate up into, they have a growing family, they might have pets, and so you have kind of the pet enthusiast. Then they start to kind of adopt maybe chickening, they become kind of a backyard homesteader. And then larger properties, maybe with a couple horses, we have our hobby farmers. And ultimately, we have kind of our big barn owners. And so as you think about how do you cater to each one of those customers to kind of drive that affinity, it's really finding opportunities to connect with each one of them based on their needs and helping grow their relationship with the brand. And while we spend a lot of time rolling around in the data, it's absolutely essential to kind of look through and find those kind of key hooks. I mean, there's no doubt that a Q customer, which is consumable, usable, edible, a customer who's buying dog food and coming in every 6 to 8 weeks is absolutely a regular customer. So incentivizing that behavior is absolutely essential. But I think spending time on our customers' properties has been one of the biggest unlocks. So one of the things that we have as part of my team in the organization is we have a customer research group, and we actually go out to to the customers' properties and we talk with them. And I think one of the big unlocks was really understanding just how that we, as a dependable lifestyle retailer, that wasn't just marketing. We really are. We're viewed as a partner to our customers. We started to think through, what does growth look like for those customers who are coming in on a weekly or monthly basis. And that's really led to a lot of the strategy as we think about the life out here, kind of the next chapter towards 2030. Those insights have led to a lot of those initiatives of how do we further engage that big barn, those hobby farmer, backyard homesteader customers, recognizing that the affinity is always there. It's how do we kind of graduate them into the relationship with the brand.
It's a really interesting point. You know, Steve and I both run pretty big loyalty programs, and you think about retention and growth and, you know, lift and shift, you know, just as you think about actually incrementing behavior for your most loyal customers, right? So you really experienced, in what I've seen, a lot of dynamism in the program where you kind of reflect back in and come up with programs within programs, not to just retain or get them from the 7th decile to the 8th or the 4th or the 5th. Talk about that, like the hometown heroes and how you're kind of getting into the program and really innovating in and around beyond, you know, we're going to increment with some points and we're going to do some other things.
This is my favorite part of the program and some of the things that we do. It actually builds on what we talked about spending time with our customers. One of the things that's amazing about Tractor Supply is we all spend time in the stores. We all spend time with our customers. And it was about a couple of years ago, we were in the process of the Orscheln acquisition, and in strategy I was supporting that. And I was standing behind a register with one of our new team members, listening to them talk about the Neighbors Club, which is, you know, my favorite thing to talk about, right? and they were pitching.
You found your people.
And they were, you know, asking, you know, are you a Neighbors Club member? You know, have you signed up? And the customer said something along the lines of, oh, I'm a Neighbors Club member. I've given you my phone number and email address. I haven't seen a lot of the benefits from that program. And that kind of, you know, that sticks you deep, right? That was hard. And so when we went back to the data, what we saw was that was very much the truth. Like if we had a program where the default reward, because we give about a penny back per dollar spend at the base level, we had a default a setting in the program where you got a $10 reward, which means you had to spend $1,000. And what we found is that our default setting, you know, $1,000, that's, you know, the top tier, top echelons of our customer base. So only about 20% of our customers were receiving those reward redemptions that we absolutely wanted them to be receiving.
Because you want that earn and burn thing to go. The more they burn those points, the more loyal they are, the more they want to earn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so all we had to do was we just kind of recalibrated the default rewards program, and that's drove a tremendous amount of engagement and those higher retention rates because our customers are seeing the value of the program and the opportunity to kind of engage that. And the Hometown Hero program is exactly the same way. You know, Tractor Supply has always had, as part of the foundation, as part of our mission, our values, this commitment to our veterans, to those who serve, because they're the ones who make life out here possible. And I was sitting in one of the stores. This was actually another store in Northwest Missouri, and we were in the process. Orscheln had a program. The customer had come in and asked a little bit about that. That program was changing, and I was communicating to the customer, you know, we donate a ton to all these wonderful veterans programs. We have discount days throughout the year. And the customer looked at me straight in the eyes and said, but I served every day. And that's something that sticks with you because when we went back, we said, well, then we need to make sure that we have a program that serves our first responders and our veterans every day. And so you'll see that in all the marketing because that came directly from a customer. And our leadership team had no pushback. They had always wanted to kind of think through what that would look like. And so we had full support around how do we build this program out to really honor those who serve us.
Let's talk about personalization. So what do you call it? Putting the person in personalization. I mean, it's not uncommon for someone to get up on a stage or be here at Shop Talk and say the customer is the center of our focus. And, you know, that's
Wait. I'm writing that down.
You get that down.
Wait, customer-centric, is that a word?
Be customer-centric, and it's all about the customer. But you really seem to have taken it to the next level as you kind of figure out these iterations and these Venn diagrams within your program. So talk a little bit about your philosophy, if we would call it that it becomes the strategy behind that part of the program. Yeah,
when I think about Tractor Supply, two of the most important reasons why our customers shop us is, one, because we have a remarkable supply chain team that keeps us always in stock, right? And your average customer is purchasing, you know, a few, call it 3 or 4 items, with each trip. A lot of our competitors, they know that they can get a couple of them, but it's uncertain whether they're going to get, you know, the 3rd or 4th item. At Tractor Supply, they know we are the dependable supplier, and so there's a lot of draw in that regularity that comes from that. The second is our team members. and that relationship that they have with our team members. Steve, I'm sure when you've walked into a Tractor Supply, you feel that relationship, right? They know your name, they know your animal's name, and so really leveraging the strengths of those two kind of pillars to kind of think through what the Neighbors Club program can do to kind of increase the value of those offers. So a lot of our competitors focus on email, digital communications on the site, and there's no doubt we have a huge, $1 billion site program. We send a ton of communications personalized, but at the end of the day, that regularity of that visit, because we are that dependable supplier, and that relationship that they have with the team member is an incredibly valuable asset that we had to think creatively about. And so what we've done is started to take those offers, those unique propositions that we can provide that are uniquely relevant to the customer and put them in the store. So our team members have mobile point of sale units or at the register, and they have an acronym about how they sell. It's a rallying cry. It's called GURA. G is for greet, U is for uncover, R is for recommend, A is for asking and appreciating. And so they're spending a lot of time, obviously greeting the customer, but uncovering what is it that customer needs, and then providing a recommendation of what that should be. Now with the data that we have in the Neighbors Club, we can use some of that advanced data science and that analytics to really help with that uncover and put that in the hands of the customer, or in the hands of the team member at the register or at the point of sale, in the mobile point of sale, and then help give them a tool with a specific coupon or an offer to recommend that. I'll give you an example. If you'd come into my store and you purchased a dog toy or a treat, there's a pretty good chance
you have. It could be a gift, but that gifting throws up loyalty.
Right. But there's a pretty good chance you have a dog. But if you haven't purchased dog food from us before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I put that offer for dog food right there at the register. So as you're checking out, that team member can say, "Hey, have you ever purchased dog food from us?" And invariably, is the price? Well, we have a price match guarantee. Do you have my brand? Absolutely. And that's really the opportunity to kind of help them uncover and then recommend and drive that affinity for that next level up, of product or offering that the customer might not have been familiar with. And so really putting that in real life rather than just keeping it as a digitally native kind of exercise.
How does that express itself cross channels? So we've been talking a lot about it, right? In-store behaviors, and these are amazing programs. But of course, there's this e-commerce thing that I hear is quite popular. Talk about how all that fits in such a personalized program.
Well, it's all linked, right? So we have it works across our customer mobile app, our site, as well as in the stores. So what we have is we have our Neighbors Club wallet, and so all of those offers exist across all those channels in one place, in one wallet for the customer. And so the customer always has that at access. And so our challenge is really, how do we always make sure that that's popping up and is relevant at the right time? And so it's funny, we always talk about personalization. I think that's a great zeitgeist of a word. It's always been relevance, right? Being where your customer is at the time in which they need it. And so just making sure that it pops up in the site or at the app or in the store, wherever, or in your email, wherever the customer is at that time.
So can you talk, I guess, both within the Neighbors Club program, but more broadly about the role of experimentation in unlocking new opportunities and just how that has worked for you?
I think it's necessary. I think if we were all to talk around our growth mindset, that's what we've adopted at Tractor Supply, particularly in the marketing organization. Everything is a test, right? Everything is an A/B test or multivariate test of how we grow and learn. And so I get just as excited about tests that might not be successful and we've learned something and it iterates on and we say, oh, it's not a failure, it's just a learning, and how do we iterate on that? And I think that the challenge is never about do we adopt that, it's how do we do that more, how do we do that faster, and how do we scale that? And that's where a lot of the technology you're hearing about at Shop Talk becomes really powerful. It used to be machine learning, it's all within the scope of AI, and how do you do that at a lot faster clip than maybe we've ever done it in the past?
Well, we may have gone the longest in an episode this year before we heard the word AI.
Did I get the record?
Yeah. So
22, we're almost over 20 minutes.
Yeah. So there we go. But sticking on that for just a second, are you guys experimenting with or I don't know, curious about agentic AI as a way to complement, either provide maybe the sort of in-store experience in a purely digital world, or how are you thinking about that?
The answer is absolutely. And what's particularly compelling to me about agentic AI is the concept is so huge, it kind of feels like, how do you eat the elephant, right? You have to have all this data in one place. But the ability to kind of parse that off into simple tasks, small tasks, and use AI to address those has been super powerful. So, for example, writing a subject line for an email. You can have a copywriter do that for all these different variants. Or, to your point on testing, you can deploy 10, 15 different versions of a subject line that's slowly trickling out, and then seeing which one's driving the greatest amount of open rates or click-through rates, and kind of sort of skew towards that subject line. And then the subject lines are continuing to learn based on what is most successful with each type of customer, right? So super powerful, and it's a very small application. But if you take each one of those small applications and you look for each opportunity to apply that, that's where this becomes really powerful, rather than trying to solve for everything all at once. If that makes sense.
Interesting. Last question for you. Wrap up on this kind of a broad advice question. There's a lot going on in consumers and consumers' minds. I mean, sometimes retailers get a bit lucky because maybe your chicken business is pretty good because people are looking to have eggs, and other times, things might be plus minus, or that's a race to value. Talk about your advice to your fellow retailers and what advice you'd have about building the kind of loyalty. Is loyalty the kind of the 10x fix to whether it's good times, bad times, or somewhere indifferent? Like, what's that role, and what's your advice to them? They may not have your resources, but philosophically and strategically, how do you think about that?
I think it's three things. So I'm going to you asked for one. I'm going to give three pieces. One is, if you are developing a loyalty program, I hear a lot of people talking about breakage rates and counting on their economics around, like it's this game. We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make sure we reduce breakage rate. We want our customers to engage and use the rewards. And we spend a lot of time developing those rewards because we want them to utilize them. We spent time just this year thinking about how we're going to evolve the program. And we looked at the benefits that they're not using. And those are the things that we think we have to evolve or develop for new. And where does that come from? And that's the second piece of advice, is spending time with our customers. I told you about going out and spending time on their properties. It's very easy to sit behind a laptop, to sit behind your computer and look at the data. It's another thing to ride a gator around their property and help feed their goats and realize that the types of things that they really need and that they really value as their partner. And then I think the third thing is you talked about resources, just start. I had the good fortune, and I don't know him personally, so I'm not trying to name drop, but Jamie Dimon was speaking in Nashville, and he talked about when he was at Bank One, thinking about, I think he was talking about like the auto loan market or something along those lines, and it wasn't coming to clarity to the rest of the team that he was talking to about the impact of it. And he said, let's just take one customer and their auto loan and the default rate. And so he said, just start with one. And I think that that's something that I've taken when we talk about loyalty testing or new opportunities. Let's just take one customer. Let's just see if we can get one customer to shop one more time. And so when you think about having a loyalty program or just getting started, just get started. Think about one. It's very easy to get overwhelmed with 38 plus million Neighbors Club members. The variants are infinite.
Yeah.
But if you can just start with one and just try it, you don't need all the AI in the world, right? Just try the test, see what happens, react to it, and learn. And I think just getting started and not letting yourself getting overwhelmed by that is a very powerful, and it's very easy to have the inertia to not get started because it seems overwhelming.
Right on. Well, listen, Neil, this has been fantastic. Like a masterclass in loyalty. I love talking about loyalty, and with a practitioner,
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it.
with a practitioner like yourself, just getting in and the interesting things you're doing with the program. So thanks so much.
I think we're always learning, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's just so key. Thanks for joining Steve and I on Remarkable Retail Podcast. Real treat to meet you in person, and safe travels back home.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a real privilege.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 10 are available each and every Tuesday, so be sure and tell all your friends in the retail industry all about us. And make sure and visit our newly refreshed YouTube channel for exclusive video and our new virtual store tours. If you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 2 books, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, and Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption.
You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant and advisor, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.